دیدار و گفتگوی مایک پمپئو با خانم رجوی و سخنرانی در گردهمایی مجاهدین در اشرف 3 دوشنبه 26 اردیبهشت 1401. سخنرانی مایک پمپئو وزیر خارجه آمریکا تا ژانویه 2021 در گردهمایی مجاهدین در اشرف 3 26 اردیبهشت 1401.
Thank you all. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you so much. It is really special to be here. I mean that with all my heart. It's an honor to be here with so many patriots. I've been fighting for freedom since I was 18 years old, and I know many of you have been fighting that long as well. Bless you for staying in that fight. It's a rare opportunity to be able to speak before so many patriots who have given so much for the nation that they love. I know and saw at the museum over 1,000 political prisoners of the theocratic regime are gathered here today. And I want to say to you, from a former Secretary of State, I respect you and deeply appreciate all of the work that you have done. The things you have suffered in the name of freedom reminds us of what our country was founded on, to defend and secure so many years ago. And it's special. It's special to be here with you. I want to also recognize President-elect Maryam Rajavi. It is under her leadership that the National Council of Iran is laying the groundwork for a free, sovereign, democratic Republic of Iran. Bless you, Madam. I last had the chance to speak with you all at the Free Iran Summit about a year ago. Much has changed since then, sadly not enough. But thanks to the efforts of so many in this room, it seems clear to me that the Iranian regime is truly weak. I think you can see it. I think you can feel it. I pray that the protesters inside the nation can see it as well. And while there are challenges that lie ahead, and I know we will need to work together to see the end of the tyrannical regime in Iran, I am confident that change in that regime is in front of us. And I'll speak to that in a minute. But I want to start at the beginning. I want to speak about the beginning, the revolution of 1979. Of course, the beautiful history of Persia, I could go back so much further in history. It's a history that many of you in this room know. Most of you know it better than I do. At this moment, though, the counter-revolutionary founding of the theocratic regime resides at the heart of the conflicts, the Iranian conflicts of today. And I say conflicts because there are indeed multiple conflicts, and each of those conflicts is worth spending just a few minutes on. First, the conflict between the Iranian regime and Israel and the great state in the United States of America. The conflict between the Iranian regime and the Gulf state Sunni Arabs. And of course, the conflict between the Iranian regime and modernity and the people of Iran. And we must understand each of these three conflicts. Look, one conflict that you have to appreciate in order to restore Iran to its rightful place in history is the conflict between Iran and its people. This is the real fight. And it began in those frightful first moments of the counter-revolution back in 1979. This central fight is the one in the streets, in the mosques, and in the minds of the Iranian people. It's the divide between the people and the opposition seeking freedom and democracy on one side, and the entirety of the regime on the other. Make no mistake, that opposition is real. The people in this room today are a testament to that fact. And I'm proud, as I said a year ago, that we have been with you. I have been with you the entire time. We know that as far back as 2010, I spoke with the Iranian people and their history, their kindness, their respect for reason, knowledge, and human life. You are a tolerant people, a homeland for Arabs and Jews and Christians and Muslims. It can be found, it has been found for Iranian history, it has been found on Iranian soil. And the Iranian people want to prosper in their faith and protect their families. You should know this is as true in Tehran as it is in Los Angeles, or Austin, or Nashville, or Kings Point. Then there's the regime. In May of 2018, as your leader just spoke about, I said at the Heritage Foundation's what? I said, the regime, it reaps a harvest of suffering and death in the Middle East at the expense of its own citizens. Iran's economy today is stagnant. It's without direction. It plunders, it loots. And I think it's about to get worse. The regime, of course, is headed by the Ayatollah, by Raisi, and by the IRGC. And for a moment, let me just say, it would be abhorrent to not reflect the IRGC as the terrorist organization that it is and remains. I pray that our government will not make such a mistaken decision. The IRGC and its revolutionary zeal is brutal. Many of you and your families have suffered from it. It is theocratic. It is, of course, craven and kleptocratic as well. And as I saw in the museum today, and I have known for years, its leaders have killed thousands of their own. And they choose those who committed such massive atrocities to lead their terror organization and their regime because they're willing to kill thousands more. Its leaders can shoot down a civilian airliner, killing hundreds of civilians, and think nothing of denying responsibility and hiding that little black box from the world. I remember that night. I remember those innocent people killed. Those of you gathered here today undoubtedly read headlines from the Western world and know the stances of many of our leaders towards the regime in Tehran. But I want to make sure you know, that many of us in the West know, that we must dismiss a central Western conceit. It's been pushed by the regime and bought lock, stock, and barrel in the salons of Brussels and Paris and Bonn, and indeed by too many in Washington, D.C. It is the central conceit that there are such things as moderates within the regime. This is flatly false. Just as Al-Qaeda and ISIS choose different tactics to achieve their murderous ends, so too do regime officials vie for momentary praise and power by choosing different tactics, different approaches. But make no mistake about it, every member of that regime shares the same goal. These individuals are but actors, occupying roles in the same show of force. The Ayatollah plays the father, the keeper of the revolutionary faith, and the elder statesman, protecting the counter-revolution from each of its threats, including the threats from the secular within and outside of Iran. Soleimani played the warrior hero role, but he was anything but. This, as so many as this room today know and suffered at his hand. You should know that there were friends of mine that were killed by Qasem Soleimani as well. For years, you were his #1 targets. You're not only survivors of Soleimani's cruelty, but you're also working towards real change in Tehran. Ibrahim Raisi, the butcher. Ibrahim Raisi, the butcher who orchestrated the 1988 massacre, is now president of Iran. But he's not truly the president of Iran. All of them will keep the show going, despite the audience wanting their run to continue and to never end. They're prepared to use the IRGC and the Basij and any tool to keep their grip on the people. It's this understanding of the regime as counter-revolutionary and largely unchangeable that informed the work we did in the Trump administration. Our mission was really, really simple. I presented it in May of 2018. At the top of this, we demanded that the regime simply comply with 12 basic ideas, 12 simple requirements that we ask of every nation in the world. And we made it clear. We made it clear that if they failed to do so, we would apply every American pressure to deny the regime the power to kill its own people and to foment terror around the region and around the world. We didn't do this alone. We formed alliances to achieve these very ends. And our mission was purposeful. We had isolated Iran in a way that it had never been isolated before. First, our program made clear the most important fact, that the Iranian people must be supported in every way possible, acknowledged as being held in contempt by the counter-revolutionary regime, and provided every tool possible, even the relative power between the people and the regime. Look, this was new. The previous administration, the one before ours, had propped up the regime at the very expense of the people. And when in 2009 they had a chance to support the Iranian people's uprising, they simply walked away. Second, our purpose. Leveling the power differential between the people and the regime relied on eliminating the power of the regime to the maximum extent possible. We used every tool. The most obvious was economic. We worked also to reduce the external capabilities of the Iranian regime everywhere and on all fronts. We went after proxy forces. We went after them through information warfare and their efforts to use their nuclear program to coerce and extort people all across the world. We placed thousands of sanctions upon the regime. Look, the regime was clearly at its weakest point. You could see it in the value of the rial. You could see it in the reduction in the amount of foreign exchange reserves. With no ability to sell more than a few 100,000 barrels of oil per day, no money, no foreign exchange reserves. Facilities blowing up all over, not only inside of Iran, but at sea and abroad. The IRGC conquering hero Soleimani was erased from the face of the earth, no longer able to serve the regime and keep down the patriots at home and abroad, those of you in this room. A paranoia that is justified by understanding that counter-revolution cannot be maintained forever, and that the resistance forces inside of Iran, these noble Iranian patriots, are as strong as they have ever been, and they provide optimism to all who support them. Our final prong of our effort was about the people. It was about you, about the people inside of Iran. As much as our economic pain and as much as our military efforts put pressure on the Iranians, the thing that troubled them the most, the thing that worried them the most was our effort to support the Iranian people. Our policy supported the Iranian people at every turn. When there were labor strikes, when there were labor strikes or product price boycotts, we made clear that these were the result of counter-revolutionary incompetence, not failures of the Iranian people. And we did our best to support to those who wanted to be lifted from the yoke of the regime. You saw it in the election that took place. Turnout was the lowest since 1979, marking a total rejection of the regime and its candidate. It was, in fact, nearly a complete boycott of the regime. And you can be sure that the regime knows it. They can publish whatever numbers they want, whatever numbers they choose, but turnout was insignificant. And the fact that this is a show laid bare for the entire world to see has diminished them in the eyes of the people of Iran and of the world. This election was heavily impacted by a series of major social upheavals, including in 2017, in 2018, and 2019. Uprisings whose main slogan was hardliners, reformers, the game is over now. These slogans included death to the dictator, shaking the foundations of the regime in its entirety. The uprisings demonstrated the Iranian people pin no hope on elections overseen by an Ayatollah as a conduit for substantive change. The regime is indeed weak, at its lowest point in 40 years. Iranians from every corner of the nation can see the failure of the regime to deliver on the simple promises that it made. You see it even as we are here today, May 2022. We watch the video clips, we see the notes, And we hear the people of Iran rising up, demanding the change that they so richly deserve. We saw, too, the epic incompetence of this regime in so many ways. Epic incompetence in handling COVID-19 was made plain throughout the pandemic. The vaccination rate in Iran is among the lowest in the world, not because the vaccine is not available. Indeed, we offered it to them, but because the regime refuses to accept those vaccines from those prepared to provide them. The regime's epic incompetence in quest for nuclear power has made it a pariah even among its fellow Muslim nations. Its epic incompetence in simply ruining the nation has made food and gas and basic staples unaffordable. The nation's ability to respond to natural floods, natural disasters, earthquakes, well, it's relatively non-existent today. Iran is not working, and the people of Iran know it. And as for President Raisi, he's not the president of the people of Iran. He's the president simply appointed by the Ayatollah, and his mission is clear. Inflict pain, frighten, continue to loot and plunder. But you should know. You should know Raisi has already failed. He has failed to crush the uprisings in Iran or break the noble spirit of dissent within the Iranian people. And the resistance is part of making that happen. I remind my friends who sometimes forget the simple fact that it may be the case that Iran is the greatest breaker of treaties in the history of the world. Unfortunately, some in the West, including in the current administration, want to keep the regime on life support. Their devotion, their commitment to reviving the failed nuclear deal presents real risk to the work that the people of Iran are trying to achieve. We watched the regime just in September of this year turn away inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Association. They refused to permit compliance with a set of agreements that they signed up for, that they had agreed to. And we also know, based on the seizure of a trove of documents, that Iran never fully gave up its commitment to have the capacity to build a nuclear weapon. It was keeping a reference library of its nuclear program, its nuclear weapons program. For what other purpose would one keep such documents other than to revive such a program, to build on such a program, to complete such a program in the future? We know, too, that they continue to enrich uranium at Fordow in violation of their agreement, something that is clearly forbidden by promises that they made. Let's be clear. Iran never complied with their agreements. In fact, we should note they never intended to. The individuals and organizations that the United States is contemplating lifting sanctions on would be a huge step backwards. I pray that this will not be. You should know that the work you do, talking to elected officials in Washington, D.C., and all throughout Europe and the world, makes them stronger, makes them understand, helps them appreciate what's truly good for the people of Iran. Stay at it. Continue to do this work. It matters, it is important, and it has its intended effect. This brings me to my final point. A serious missing factor in U.S. policy towards Iran has been the lack of political support for the organized opposition. The regime in Tehran went to the extreme to massacre 30,000 political prisoners whose main targets and a majority of its victims were the MEK. The threat of attack extends far beyond Iran's borders, with the regime having waged terror plots throughout Europe and the United States against the leaders of this movement. Now to correct Iran policy, no matter who is in the White House, is a necessity for the United States administration to reach out to the Iranian resistance and take advantage It's one of the reasons I'm so excited to be here at اشرف 3, because actions supporting our love of the Iranian people are many. They should begin by holding Ibrahim Raisi accountable for his crimes against humanity back in 1988. And I know there are those in the audience who have family that were killed in this massacre. Bless you. The Pummpeu family prays for you. It is true, too, that some of you have loved ones, friends, currently in prison in Evin and elsewhere in Iran, and some who have had loved ones who have simply disappeared or worse. We will never forget any of them, and we will pray for all of them. The United States speaks a great deal of human rights. There are few places in the world in which violations of human rights are committed with more frequency or more depredation than inside of Iran. We should never forget this as part of America's policy or the policy of the West. We cannot shower the Ayatollah with money, economic benefits, in the hopes that it won't be used to inflict terror and oppression, because we know the evidence is in. Even Secretary Kerry had to admit that when resources are provided to this regime, they will be used to inflict terror and horrors. I should let you know, however, that I'm hopeful. You all are hopeful too. You're here today. You continue your work because you too share my optimism, your hope, your faith. The world has learned much about this theocracy in the past few years. And it's not that we didn't know it before, but we were frankly a little afraid to address it squarely. In Washington, D.C., there's much consensus, as evidenced by the overwhelming support of the sanctions regime that we put in place. And indeed, you can see it around the world now, too. You can see that even in Europe, the tide of tolerance of this regime is diminishing. I can feel it turning. We all must continue to support the Iranian people as they fight for a freer, more democratic Iran. We must do so in every way that we can. There is so much work that the American civil society can do to further this goal, and its work with your organization to be actively engaged to keep up this fight matters. It is important. I get asked often the one question I cannot answer for you today, the question of when. When will it be the case that the Iranian people get the government that they so richly deserve and which they are all demanding? I can't answer that. I don't think any of us in this room can answer this today. We know, however, that in the end, the Iranian people will have this democratic, non-nuclear republic. I pray that it will come soon. But my optimism comes from my understanding of history and my personal experience as well. In 1989, I was a young lieutenant serving in the United States Army in what was then West Germany. I patrolled every day the border of the then East German country. Across from us was an intolerant regime, the East German regime, powerful, oppressive, using its security forces to quell any uprising inside of East Germany, backed by the mighty power of the Soviet Union. We worked, but we didn't know the day. And then, in November of 1989, without any notice, it came to pass. It came to pass that the will of the people changed the regime in East Germany. One could not have predicted the moment, but it would not have happened without so much work, so much effort from inside and efforts from resistance from the outside as well. These days, these changes, these momentous occasions often occur when one might least expect it. But know that none of this happens through simple grace. It happens through hard work and effort and determination and relentlessness and fearlessness. the very hard work and determination and fearlessness and relentlessness that I see in front of me today. May your mission be blessed and the Iranian people protected and provided for always. It is a hopeful time, a time to redouble all of our efforts. Thank you so much for having me here today. May God bless each and every one of you. Thank you.
مایک پمپئو: امروز به آلبانی رفته بودم تا با جامعه ایرانیان در آنجا صحبت کنم. آنها حق مقاومت در برابر آخوندها و تلاش برای رسیدن به آنچه را که مردم ایران خواستار آن هستند و برایش تظاهرات می کنند دارند و آن هم آزاد کردن مردم ایران از یوغ رژیم ظالم حاکم بر این کشور است.